Welcome to the Emotional Mastery Podcast. Today, I have Courtney Hanson, who is the host of the Sweetest Little Life Podcast, author, and I'm so excited to have you here to share your story today. So I always ask just at the beginning for you to share your story as much or as little as you would like about your journey, anything that happened along the way that kind of got you to where you're at today.
Absolutely. Well, one, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to chat again.
Of course.
And my story is messy. I started off, I didn't have the best childhood. I grew up with a dad who was very limited beliefs. I grew up very religious, went to Christian school, the whole 9 yards. And then as I got older, my grandma was a huge part of my life. She was that mother archetype for me that I was missing. My mom was not around a lot. And she got lung cancer and died a pretty gnarly death when I was 12. And my dad decided to start online dating. And so with that, at the time, it was like, we had like AOL and the internet wasn't the same it was now. And so he would meet a girl and we would move states. And so I lived in the minute my grandma died, it was like the next month I was living in a completely new state. Had no friends. I was kind of the nerdy kid. And as he would have these complete blow ups with these women, and then we'd move another state. And so when I was in 8th grade, I decided to move in with my mom for the first time, and we had kind of reconnected, but had this at the time she was married, had a new family. I was kind of always that black sheep. I never had that space. And then I went from a very strict, overprotective dad to being with really little to no rules.
Mm.
And I started messing around with alcohol and stuff in high school and kind of spiraled. And then when I was 19, I ended up moving in back with my dad, who at the time lived in Indiana from Seattle. And so my whole life, it was just like this ping pong back and forth. I never had roots. I never had somewhere to call home. I never felt wanted or needed. And so my thing was from being, 12 years old, I just wanted to be a mom. Like I wanted to know what love was. And I, for some reason, put that connection together that a mother and a child were the ultimate love. And so I just wanted to have babies. So I got pregnant at 21 and it was a very toxic relationship. It was horrible. And he was in the Marines and got PTSD really bad and became very abusive, and it was horrible. And so I'm 22 years old. I think I have the world figured out and I have this little baby to take care of. And obviously that relationship did not work. And I'm a single mom now, 23, and I meet my husband because I'm cleaning houses on the side. I used to own salons and I did cosmetology because, no offense, but that's what single moms tend to do, right? It's an easy way to go to school. It's doable. It's a flexible schedule. And so I was doing the cosmetology thing and I was cleaning houses and I met my husband and we had kids. We had a happy marriage. I would do the wine mom nights. Everything was great. And I was a closet alcoholic, but I was maintaining, right? Like I was functional. It looked great from the outside. Everything was good. And I could hold my alcohol. Well, my third child came along and he was the only child that we really tried for. And I had miscarriage after miscarriage. I couldn't get pregnant. I finally got pregnant and I was like deathly sick, like so sick. And so I went from being a stay-at-home Pinterest mom influencer, like I was a mommy blogger, and that was my career. Like I couldn't just stay home because I'm a go, go, go type person. I'm a manifesting generator. I need to have 100 different things happening at once. And so I had no connection with spirituality at this time. My whole identity was not Courtney. It was being Audrey and Liam's mom. That was it. And so we did all the sports. We did all the things that you were supposed to do to look good. And inside I was miserable. And so my kids got used to me doing all of these things. And then I got sick and I had to go on bed rest. My husband had to stop working for a while. And then my little one came 2 months early. And when he came, it was an emergency C-section. My water broke and my hormones just dropped. And they took him to the NICU. And all of my abandonment issues from childhood just hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea what was going on. No one had ever talked to me about postpartum depression. And so I had the C-section. I had him early, which is a whole nother hormone drop. And I was lost. I was just sitting in that hospital bed. My husband had to be with my other two children. So I was by myself. My child, I was literally walking, I think 4 hours after I just had a C-section because they wouldn't let me go see him until I was able to walk. And so I just powered through. And that was what I did, was I just kept powering through. And when I went home without him, I was more disconnected than other moms I've talked to that have done the whole NICU thing, because I had all of this underlying trauma from when I was younger that I had never dealt with or talked about openly. And so fast forward, he came home and everything was okay. And my husband got a promotion at work. And so he was gone for 6 months. So I am now here with 3 kids, trying to figure out what is going on with my own self. But I'm trying to be strong because I don't want anyone to know my internal battles that are going on, because I was raised that you're weak if you can't figure shit out. Like, you're supposed to power through. Oops, can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to, get through it. I was like, if I can just get through this 6 months, if I could just get through this 6 months. Well, then I was lonely. I was lost. I had this ex pop up and I did the unthinkable. I come from a line of cheaters. That's why my parents broke up. And I was like, I would never do that. My sister came out polyamory and I was like, oh God, like the judgiest person you could be. And I ended up having an affair with an ex-boyfriend. And it all came out and I lost it. And all of a sudden, through my drinking got heavier and heavier and heavier. And one morning I just snapped and I was like, you know what? I can't keep doing this to my family. So I'm going to go just drink myself to death in a hotel room and then they'll be happy. I won't damage them like my mom damaged me. Like, it will be better. And so I had a friend come over and watch my kids and told her I was just going to clear my head, checked into a Holiday Inn, and had planned to drink myself to death. And so my husband was sending the police and doing all these welfare checks. And at this point, I just hated him more than any person on the planet. And I was so close to being able to pull off this grand scheme that I had planned in my mind. And I dropped to my knees, and my grandmother wore this perfume, and it was called Passion. And it was like the most god awful stench you will ever smell. It was horrible. And this passion smell just went woofting by me. And I lost it. And all of a sudden, all of these memories from childhood came back that I dissociated from. And she told me I wasn't done. And I was like, fuck you, I'm done. Like, I can't live like this. I'm miserable. And lots of had happened in between then. If you read my book, you can hear my whole story. But for time lapse purposes, it was just, I was at a very, very dark place. And I didn't know at the time that this was the point of my spiritual awakening. This was the point that I was going to really begin to step into my dharma. And it was scary. It was the scariest moment of my life. And so I got up and I kept drinking for probably like 4 more days. And then I decided it was time to stop. And I went through horrible withdrawals, which at the time I didn't even know you could withdraw from alcohol with wine. But I was throwing up blood. I was on the floor. I was literally like, just shoot me now. And so I got detoxed and I went and got help. And by getting help and actually working through trauma, because in my mind, I always thought that trauma was like, you saw someone get shot or saw someone get hit by a car. I had no idea that sexual abuse and things that I experienced as a child were things that carry with you as an adult. And so I became so passionate. And before, I had only been put in counseling situations that it was, oh, how do you feel about this? Oh, okay, you're just on a church camp high right now. Or, these comments that really stuck with me and made me have these blocks in my own healing journey. And so I just started writing. And I met this woman named Julia who changed my life. And she was my personal trauma therapist. And she taught me these different modalities. And she was like, your parents are fucking assholes. Like, fuck them. And I was like, whoa, are you allowed to say that? Like, can you say that to me? No, I'm the one that's caused all these problems. I did this. Like, and I carried so much guilt and shame. And I never had anyone my entire life empower me, because I came from this super verbally abusive, like kind of the dirt on the bottom of the shoe. You mess everything up. I was always an inconvenience. And so when I first heard that, I was like so uncomfortable and so just, oh. And so she was able to guide me to a space with these modalities that I became so passionate that I went back to school. I completely changed careers in my 30s, and I became passionate about teaching other women this. And so I started documenting, just writing and journaling my own healing practice, and it formulated into within my book. And once I went back to school, I was able to kind of adopt my own modalities and see what worked and what didn't. And I started to realize how powerful our minds are. And when we are empowered and when we do have that space to heal with the different modalities, because it's not a one size fits all, what works for one person is not going to work for the next. It was life changing. And so now I am able to help other women with my struggle that I was ashamed of and used to hide. And now it is my mission to spread awareness and help people to truly step out of trauma and know that there is a life out of trauma.
Thank you so much for sharing that, being vulnerable. And it's a really powerful story. I think especially, you talk about being a child and just taking all of that on, that you were wrong, and I think that's, we're so often like surrounded by adults that just don't even understand their own shit. Right. And so it's even, coming from when I first started going to therapy too, and understanding my relationship with my parents, just that understanding of like, it wasn't me, but also that forgiveness piece for me was big, and just being able to understand like my parents did the best they could with what they had at the time.
Yeah.
I know that's not everybody's experience, but when you were going off the alcohol, right, and you had all of this like the shock to your system, what was the thing that like got you through that and not just going back to drinking?
My kids.
Yeah.
Hands down. At the time, well, my kids weren't around when this all happened. My husband had taken them. He's from a different state. So he had taken them to the state to go be with grandma and grandpa. I had never been away from them for more than like 2 hours at a time because I was a stay-at-home mom. And like I said, it was a very codependent, like I couldn't live without them situation. And so this was the first time, and they were gone for 7 days. And so I had 5 days to fully detox and get it out of my system. And it was horrible. Like I just remember sitting on my couch in a ball crying with my dog. And my dad, who at the time I hadn't talked to in 2 years, had come down from a different state to be with me to make sure I was okay through that time. And it was absolutely horrible. It was a nightmare, but my children were for sure the one thing. Cause at the time I wasn't yet on my healing journey. I hadn't had any guidance, any help. So that was it. I just had tunnel vision of like, you can't do to them what your mom did to you.
Mm. And you said that you had this idea in your head that, you wanted to be a mom, right? To kind of fix that relationship maybe that you didn't have with your mom, and that messaging that was, the love piece there. How did you receive that messaging if you didn't, like you didn't feel it in your life? So how was that like, what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, how was that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The messaging that you received, or how did you receive that specific?
I think it was, and as silly as this sounds, like when I was younger, I would look at girls like at the mall. I grew up in Seattle, so the mall was like the thing to do, right? And so I would look at these moms and their daughters shopping together and doing all these things. And again, that was something that I had to undo limiting belief wise too, was I associated gifts with love. And so with my oldest, it was like, we had to reprogram a lot of stuff because his first 2 years, it was like, let me buy you the world. Let me do everything for you. Let me, let me shower you in gifts because this is how you show love. And it was like, I never really knew what love was until I was in my 30s. And my poor husband, we are still married, by the way, really got dragged through the mud, but it was really beautiful in a sense that we were two very broken people. And not saying that this happens all the time, but we both were very spiritual and we both wanted to heal, but we had to allow each other space. And so it was this really tricky Macarena of me healing on my path, him healing on his path, and then coming together and sharing that together. But providing space when you're in codependency is a whole challenge in itself.
And you were both codependent?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm definitely my journey. I'm definitely healing codependence as well. And I think I got into attachment styles, and understanding that has been really helpful for me, that like the reason that someone healthy doesn't feel like they care about me, right, is because you're always like seeking that, like that toxic cycle, right? Like the drama and the intensity and the passion.
Yes.
And just like that, reminding myself, it doesn't have to be like that. I don't always have to be like so activated emotionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so before you kind of had that awakening, were you spiritual in any way, or that just kind of was like, you were in
I
the hotel room and
I think I was confused really because I have always had a relationship with God, but it was a very religious relationship. And so I look back now and I have to giggle because I live in a very small town and the church here is very fire and brimstone. And I would go to church and then I would go start drinking at noon. And, then but I went to church. So everything was
yeah.
good. And I look at my life now and I don't go to church. Nor would I ever step foot in that church. But I look at my life now and I look at the people, like my son is 11 and he just had an experience a few weeks ago, actually, that a little boy that he used to play with was like, I can't be your friend because you don't go to church. And so you're going to be going to hell. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's what. So I think I was more so really confused. Whereas now I think of spirituality as this all-encompassing, really true embodiment of duality of your shadow self and your light self. Whereas before it was like this fake facade of religion and being rules and being told what to do. And I personally, if that works for you, great, but it didn't work for me. And it was a very dual lifestyle that didn't feel authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think, I mean, I would love to say, yes, I was spiritual before, but I don't think I truly understood what spirituality meant.
Mm-hmm. How do you navigate that with your kids now? Because I relate to that. My daughter's 12 and
Yeah.
she likes girls. And so she's struggling with that in school because I'm in Texas too. Everybody's pretty religious and she's been getting stuff like that at school. People will say, you're gay, you're going to hell, it's not okay. And she's coming home and she's confused. She's like, I don't even know if I believe in God because why would God do this? And I'm like, ask the questions. That's okay. So I would be curious how you navigate that with your children.
Yeah. So I have really come to a space now in parenting where I feel, and it's tricky. It's so funny because when I first got spiritual, rewinding back a little bit, and I don't know if you've gone through this, but I really felt like it was like this one person show. Like I couldn't share spirituality because I didn't quite understand it because it's so vast, right? Like there's so many layers to it. And so I really wanted my kids to have the space to believe what they wanted to believe in without having to adopt what I was doing or where I was. And then I started to it started off like really organic. Like I would do moon circles and my 7-year-old daughter would ask to come. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Cause they tell everything, like at that age, they're like walking. So I'm like, oh gosh, if you go tell your teacher that you were dancing under the moon, like that's probably not going to look good. But I think for me, it was when I stopped giving a shit, truly, because there's a difference between saying you don't give a shit about what people think and truly living free.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it was years into my journey when I was truly not giving a shit what people thought of me or my parenting style. And there's still parents in my town that think I'm completely nuts for how I raise my children because I do support them in whatever they want to believe. And I do encourage them to do their own research and to see what resonates and what doesn't, because I don't want to be a mother that instills my trauma and my beliefs onto them. Mm-hmm. And so for my oldest, we had a talk afterwards and I had just told him, I was like, well, what do you believe in? And he's like, well, I have a relationship with God. And he's like, it's maybe not that God, but I have a relationship with God. I talk to him and he talks back. And I'm like, cool, like, awesome. So do you want to go to church? And he's like, no, I don't think he's a really good friend. And he had kind of like, it was really cool to see because he had kind of like talked himself all the way through without me really saying a word. So I think a lot of times kids want space to feel heard and to be seen. And as adults, we're so trained and taught to, well, I'm right and you're wrong and you jump when I say jump. And, and for me, it's been really a time to step back. And I think it's funny because like I was saying, when you get on your spiritual path, it's like you think it's this solo thing, but I think parenting is one of the most fucking spiritual things you can do because my God, the amount of times a day that I'm like, have to check myself or be like, who am I coming from a space of love or am I coming from a space of, and so really being able, it's been this like growth process with my whole family. And it's really been beautiful to I cry when I talk about it, because it's really been beautiful to sit back and watch how such a traumatic event that I'm like, oh my gosh, I caused all this. And they don't even know what happened. One, they were too little. And two, um, now I get to be this woman that they feel safe in talking to, and that they feel safe in coming to. And like your daughter, like, it's a judgment-free zone. Like, I want you to always be able to confide in me and be able to guide you to your own answer instead of tell you what the answer is.
Mm-hmm. I love that you say that parenting is like one of the biggest spiritual journeys, because like, honestly, like you're exactly right. There's so many times where I will react to my children in the way that my parents reacted to me. And I catch myself real quick. I'm like, no, this is trauma, or this is just like that cycle. This is that going to that comfort zone of like what,
Yeah.
and it's coming back. And like you said, like of everything with my kids, I just want them to feel seen and heard for who they are, not because of who I think they should be. And so I always empower them. Like, yeah, I let them speak, or let them, like with my daughter, with her, she's very resistant to religion and God right now. And so I'm not like, God exists, like you need to believe in him. I just listen, and I'm like, but what if, I ask those questions to get her thinking, but I don't want to like force it on her. And then my son is 6, and he's just like, I think because I had started my journey when he was 1.5. And so he's kind of, all he knows of me is now this more spiritual side. Whereas my daughter's kind of trying to understand, like, yeah, the mom that was like drinking all the time and all these things. And then now the mom that's kind of like more on this different path. And it's kind of more confusing for her. So half her life was one way, half is another. But my son, he's just, I mean, he knows all about his astrology. He goes to school and he's like, I'm a Scorpio rising. We're like, what? But he asks,
I love it.
yeah, he gets like, the teachers email me and they say he's disruptive because he asks questions. And I'm kind of like, isn't that the purpose of school, is to ask questions? And they're like, he's respectful, but it disrupts the class. So I always tell him, I'm like, listen, ask your questions. As long as you're being respectful, be yourself. Like, I'm never going to get mad at you because you ask too many questions in school,
Yeah.
But like, so I just want them to know, like, be empowered to be who you are. And because I think that's, yeah, so often what we didn't receive as children, it was like, I was an extension of my parents, right? I had to be who they projected on me. And if I wasn't, then who was I, And although I understand in that situation, they were coming from their own trauma, but I think often as parents, we don't understand that our kids are just like they're actually individuals of their self, And so when I became an adult, I got into really toxic relationships because I felt like I had to be who they wanted me to be. I couldn't be myself because I wasn't worthy as myself. And so, yeah, just like having that wake up of like, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. This is not like my path, my purpose, and just kind of like leaning into that. Yeah. It's really powerful.
My little one is Scorpio rising too, so bless your heart.
Oh my gosh.
Fun, huh?
I try, and he has these little anger outbursts, and he's got Mars in the first house. So literally all of that is just like on his sleeve. And I'm just trying, how do you do it? Like the depth and the anger sometimes, I always tell him it's okay to be angry. Anger is a 100% completely okay emotion. Don't feel wrong for it. But I'm always like, how can we express it? How can we express it in a way that's not kicking a wall or throwing something, or, and because also at 6, when they're younger, I don't think they understand their emotions, right? They feel it. We were watching The Good Dinosaur the other day. Have you seen that one? Yeah.
Yes. And it makes me cry every damn time
exactly.
I watch it.
So I was getting upset. Yeah. I was getting upset. And my son looks at me and he goes, Mom, can we turn this off? And I was like, why? He goes, I'm feeling something. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to keep watching. And I was like, are you sad? And he was like, I think so, but can we stop? I was like, yeah. But it was like the fact that he didn't know what he was feeling, but knew enough and felt safe enough to say, hey, I'm feeling something right now that's not comfortable. Can we do something else?
We're done.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, okay. So we switched it to some like other show, but yeah.
Oh, that's really cute. Yeah. See, mine's Libra, Virgo, Scorpio. Those are his big 3. My youngest, the one that was premature. And so it's, you never know what you're getting, right?
Yeah.
So, like, biggest sweetheart, most loving, and then like it's like woo. But it's been fun to navigate, especially with 3. And I relate so much to your story because my oldest, same thing, like the first half of his life, I was lost and I was broken. And then the second part of his life, I was working and helping people and doing all these things. And he's like, what is going on? So it took him probably, honestly, 3 years to adjust to the new normal and it be integrated into his life too. But he was very resistant at first too. He was like, because one, he got away with more when I was drinking wine every night. And, you know, you have this numbing out fuck it factor after dinner time and you put your 2 glasses in. And not saying that I was hammered in front of my kids every night, but, you know, like society in general has normalized that, oh yeah, you drink wine at night and then you go to bed. And I'm like, no, that's alcoholism when you do that every night. Like that's just functioning. Like, and it's been, you know, mommy's wine or having to, and I had all those glasses, right? I feel acknowledged to talk on this just because that was me. You know, I would look at Instagram, I would see the moms doing it, and it would like okay it inside for me that what I was doing was acceptable behavior when it absolutely was not.
Yeah. Yeah. I am navigating alcohol right now too, just in the sense of I used to drink a lot. Like at the end of my marriage, yeah, it was like just to get to sleep because I didn't even want to be like in my house. So like once I started my journey, I feel like more and more like now if I do have wine, I think sometimes I think I can drink like I used to and I can't. And then I just like feel, and it's like, then it's like a 3-day hangover. And I'm like, this is not even worth it anymore. It doesn't feel good. I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like I can't sleep, you know? So I'm just like navigating that piece now. But like, I understand my kids, like if they see me with a glass of wine, then everything's like, oh, can I get on my iPad? Can I do this? And of course, yeah, you're just like, yeah, go ahead. Like I'm just enjoying myself. But I totally resonate with that. But how do you like so when you started your journey and then you know you were in this phase of like healing and helping others in your business, how did you like with your kids like seeing that transition? Because I feel like sometimes my daughter and maybe it's, you know, I am a single mom and so like I have my kids like full time. I don't have, you know, the support at home. And so I feel like sometimes I have that mom guilt where it's like I get home, I spend, you know, we do dinner time, but then I'm working on out, you know, so I can grow myself in other ways and help people and all those things. And I know my daughter sees it and I worry sometimes that she feels like that's getting attention that she should be getting. So is there like a time where you like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I actually was so blessed, and I know she'll feel comfortable with me sharing her story, so I'm going to share it. So I was teaching a workshop a couple of years ago, and the time I didn't have my own space, it was at someone else's studio, and I think it was like a Reiki workshop or something. And this older woman had come in, and keep in mind, I've forgiven my parents. I don't want this to be like a toxic, oh, shouldn't forgive her parents. I can cut my parents off. That's not what happened. I just can't healthily have a relationship with my mom and dad on the path that they're on. And I want to let them live their life. So I just choose to love them from afar. So my kids don't have that grandmother and grandfather relationship that most kids have. And they were missing that. And that's something that was really heavy on my heart at this time. And it was right around the time it had been like a month since I really decided, you know, until things change in the future, I can't do this for my own children. And for me, I just need to go heal and be happy, thinking it was going to be temporary at the time, not years later. And this woman came in and she was from Texas and had just flown in. She couldn't sit on the ground because she was so broken. She had to sit on a chair. And we had talked and we just had, it was so weird. And I can only say it as like a divine connection, but we had just connected and her name is Bren. And she started coming to all my workshops and all my classes and we got really close. And I, at the time, was having all these issues because my oldest is actually very high functioning autistic. You would never know unless he has an outbreak. Well, at the time I had these seniors in high school were watching my kids and he had an outbreak and they didn't know how to deal with it. And I was like, oh man, there goes my babysitter. And I was just cycling through babysitter after babysitter. I was like, I can't do this. Like I need to figure out something. And so I was having to call into work. I had just finished like the last of my schooling and I was all excited to, you know, gung ho work and all these things kept popping up. And I was like, what is going on? And so I was talking about it openly in one of my classes that I may not be able to continue doing these workshops because I was having issues finding someone to watch my children. And Bren had stepped forward and she's like, I can watch them for you. And I was like, oh no, it's okay. Like, I don't want to burden you. You know, it's a lot. And she had come over and the first day she was over, my oldest son went to her and he's like, I'm going to call you grandma. And I was like, what just happened? Well, fast forward a month. she had one daughter named Holland, and her daughter had committed suicide. And it was like this horrible moment. And I was there for her through that. But it was this time that it was like this paradigm shift between both of our losses, that it was like God, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, brought us together. And so she's been such an integral part of my family and such a support system for me to be able to do these things. And so I had so much mom guilt and so much pain from being away. And then she came into the picture, and I've seen this happen with different people, places, things, where like these two souls to come together, and it just makes, you get to choose your family and you get to choose who's there for you. And so for me, that was a huge part of my mom guilt really dissipating, because I knew that someone loved them equally as much as I did and was there with them. And she, like I said, it was just so natural the way it unfolded. And if someone was to tell me something like that would happen, I would have been like, you're nuts. That's never going to happen. And so, because my husband works a lot, he's a firefighter, so he's gone like days at a time. And so I can really relate to the single mom thing, because I get it. Like when they're gone, they're gone. And when he's home, but he's still tired and having to navigate the days off and stuff. And so we've made a lot of shifts over the last year to where he can be home more and I could work more, and very blessed that everything took off the way that it did. But, I was just watching a webinar the other day on this, and they were talking about how if you are working in as a light worker in the spiritual realm, really in a form of service in this, there is no way, if you are in alignment, that you could be broke or struggling, because abundance, that energy exchange is going to be there if you are actually in your dharma. And it made so much sense to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never actually thought of it like that obviously I know it's an energy exchange, and I talk on this in my book, but being able to connect to this space of, now my kids are such an integral part of my work, that I'll come home and I'm working on projects, or when I'm doing things, they'll want to come over and like help me. Or like when we were designing the app, they were like such a part of it. And my son loves coding and he loves editing videos. And so when I started my LLC, I was like, okay, like what role do you guys want? And I hired them, but it was like such a big deal for them. And they're like, okay, so what can I do? Or what can I, so I'll have my daughter like do my Canva post, or because she loves designing. So I try and find fun ways to like bring them in. And that was really hard for me, because I was like, no, this is mine. This is sacred. This is like my baby. And and my husband would call it the family business. I'm like, how is it a family business? Like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm doing I'm building a salt room, and I'm building this for you, and I'm building your yoga studio. And I'm like, when I was able to step back and be like, why am I so possessive of this? It was because I was scared it was going to get taken away from me if I was vulnerable and sharing it. So when I got to that space of being open, it like shifted the dynamics of working from home with my family. And that's what I mean when I say like it's the most spiritual experience to be a parent. And that's when that shifted for me, because before I was like, this is mine. This is my mine. Like my journey is mine. I can't let anyone in. And that was totally just me being protective, that it was going to get taken away from me somehow, some way.
That's so inspiring and so powerful. And it's funny, my daughter too, she's all into, I don't know if it's like that age, but yeah, the editing videos and the gaming things and stuff like that. You're like, give me ideas too. I'm like, oh, maybe I can actually have her do something and like be involved in it. And that could maybe help her heal a little bit too in her path. I would love to shift and talk about your book too, with the archetypes. Okay. So I would love to talk about your book and kind of talk about those archetypes, because I think I love archetypes and being able to relate to it. It makes people, I just think it's so helpful in the process of like understanding who we are and, where we came from and where we're going, all those things like that. So if you were open to talking about that, I would love to just dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I got into archetypes when I was healing. I actually didn't know who I was. So like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I came to this spot of like, I was a mom, and I was a mom, and I was a mom, and that was it. And I only had learned to be a mom from from Pinterest, right? I just saw the reels and I thought that was real. I didn't understand that people like had shitty lives, but it looked perfect on camera, right? And so I became all encompassed and all consumed with this. And it was like, I started off with shadow work. That was kind of where that was my starting point. And it led into archetypes so naturally. And so I started studying it, and I just studied the Jungian psychology for about a year. And I was like, man, this is it. Like why is this not being talked about more? Yes, it's touched on Facebook or whatever, but no one had gone into depth of how to embody each archetype and how to, and I was looking at different books, and I was like, yeah, there's like maybe like the mother archetype or the maiden archetype or the crone archetype. And those were the only three that were talked about. And I was like, there's so freaking much out there, and there's so much within the divine feminine. And so I started reading, and then I went through this phase where I swung too much on the divine feminine, and I was like, masculine's bad, da 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 da. And then I realized, I was like, oh no, there's this balance that we need to maintain. And I started aligning this within my business before the book was even out. And it was like, I really started leading sales and all of this within the feminine. And then I would do all the creation within the masculine. And I was like, wow, there's something to this. I just need to dig a little bit deeper. And so a year into research, I was like, oh my gosh, this needs to be in my book. And it was like my book completely, and you can kind of see it form and change as it goes in, but it completely changed. And I was like, I'm going to teach women how to embody each feminine archetype and how to step into that and experiment and play with it without having to attach to it. So there are times that you need to embody this queen archetype energy. There are times that you need to embody the creatrix. There are times that you need to embody the sage or the maiden. And each one has a shadow and has the healthy form of it. And so that's what the book is. It starts off with what each one looks like. So what it looks like if you're in the shadow, what it looks like if you're in a healthy flow of that archetype, and when to embody it, and then how to embody it. And so it goes into our cycles and the moons, and each one attaches, the deeper I got into it, each one attaches to Greek mythology. And so I found that fascinating. So I was like, I have to include this in. So Persephone in Greek mythology, goes from being the maiden and then comes out to be this huge queen, right? And so it was fascinating to me. And I wanted to make it accessible for women, that they didn't have to attach to one person, because we have all these pieces of us, right? If we go into internal family systems, we have all these parts inside of us, and that still makes us whole. And at each time we can embody a different part, and that's okay. And I think most people haven't been given that permission slip, that like, hey, you want to dress up at like a total queen today and you want to go embody that queen energy, like get it. And then there are other times that like you want to sit in PJs and you just want to be reading a book, and you're in that stage of just that researching phase, and like allowing your body to go through the different phases with the cycles of your body. And that was mind blowing to me. Like I had never heard anything like this, or it be put like this in a permission granted way. And so that was what I wanted to deliver to women, was like, you don't have to just be in one archetype because of what age you're in. And that is delivered a lot. And that's not what archetypes
Mm.
are. Archetypes are meant to be embodied for what phase of life you're in, what phase of the month you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that so much. Yeah. I think even just sometimes being intuitive with it, and that whether that means it's the time of month, but I think we're so often taught just to embody this masculine, like that's the way you can move forward, right? And then the feminine is just like, like seen as weak and too sensitive, and just like all these things. And starting to like embody that, when I started stepping away from like the more masculine side of everything, and even just like wearing a dress when I wanted to, I felt like I was like not even in my skin, because I was like, who is this, right? But then the more I leaned into it and the more I allowed it and like stopped resisting it, then I just like, now I feel empowered. If I'm like, I want to go out and I want to wear a dress and like do my makeup. Also, if I want to go out, and just wear like yoga pants and sneakers, like I can feel feminine and embodied like in both now, and I think I love that you have the shadow aspects in there too. For me, I mean, shadow work was huge. And I think where human design and astrology, in looking at those shadow pieces for me, where I can understand, okay, this is just like the shadow of my G center, maybe, and just like having that languaging to understand why, and then digging into it. And I think for me, so much of it was asking those questions, and like, why do I feel like this? Why am I resisting this? And like leaning into that and looking into it. How did shadow work look for you? And when you found like human design or astrology, how much of a impact did that have on your healing or spiritual journey?
Yeah. So it's so funny. I was just going to say that. I think it's so funny because, I've talked to hundreds of people and it all seems the same. And it's like, we all study the same things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it all comes at a different time, like when it's supposed to come for your personal growth and your personal journey. And so for me, it was so funny. I was working with a mentor and he had asked me, I was about a year into my journey, and he had asked me, he's like, what's your human design? And I was like, what? And he's like, what's your human design? I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he's like, you don't know what human design is? And I was like, nope, not a fucking clue. And so I was like, of course, then I felt inadequate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to study human design. What is human design? And so he's like, take this quiz and let's chat. I'm like, okay. So I took the quiz and I was like, oh, I'm a manifesting generator. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you're a squirrel. And he's like, you're supposed to be a squirrel though. And I was like, no, I think I have ADHD. And he's like, no, you don't. And he's like, you're supposed to start projects and then move to the next project. And he's like, that's your job, is to create. And I was like, oh, and it was like this huge, like, world opened for me, right? And then I really got into astrology, and that was my kind of headway into astrology. And I was like, oh my gosh, and for me, astrology was probably the one that was, because when I first started off, I needed science. I needed science to back everything that I was doing, because I still had that inadequacy. I still had that question within myself of, okay, how can I prove what I am saying is real? So in my book, there was so much research that went into it, because I was terrified that I was going to get backlash. Granted, it went the complete opposite way, and it allowed people to feel embodied, and I did not see that coming. But it was, I wanted to be able to back any word that I put in that book. And it's funny because the book was quite a project and it took a very long time to write. And as the book goes on, you can see my journey getting more and more woo. And it's really cool to go back now and read it, because I'm like, wow, it was like, so went from so factual to talking about how to do sex magic, it really swung the pendulum.
Yeah.
But it was cool, and I didn't want to change it because that was my journey, and like, it was so raw and it was so real. But when I got into human design, I got into astrology, that was my struggle. My bobby pins just went flying out. That was my struggle because I was raised religious. And so astrology, you were going to hell, like there was no question, that was not true. And I was like, I was at the time going for my Reiki master, and there was a class just on incarnation we had to do. And let me tell you the struggle that I had with incarnation, right? Because I'm like, no, you live one life, and that moment was when I realized how small my little mind was, and everyone else was wrong and this was right, and it was all fear based. And so my mentor and my Reiki master had asked me, she goes, Courtney, why are you so scared of death? I was like, well, because you're going to go to hell. Like, this is not, and she's like, but you're not religious. And I was like, huh. And she's like, don't you go to hell for not going to church in your belief? And I was like, ooh. And so anything I would say that was holding me back, she's like, I want you to vocalize it. So I would vocalize it. And then she would like come back at me with something. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of arguing within my own body right now. And everything felt not okay. And so one night I was doing shadow work, and one of the questions was, close your eyes and imagine a core memory before 5 years old. And the memory that came up was pretty traumatic. And I was like, oh, I didn't know I knew that happened. Like, well, that was weird. And she's like, it's because, she's like, you have so much blocked and you're so dissociated and you're doing this, 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 and this. And so she walked me through it. And when I got my attunement, it was like this whole other world opened up. I don't know how else to explain it. But it was like I had a magic wand, and it was like, oh my gosh, like this is not what anything I've learned is not necessarily what is the truth. And so I started like really talking to people and hearing people's stories. And that was when my podcast started. And I was like talking to all these really wise women. And it was such a growth process that it allowed me to come into astrology and come in now. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people don't believe in it, because it's been around for much longer than anything else. But coming into that space of really allowing myself to ask the questions like you were saying and to step out. And I think that's the hardest part of our growth and our journey is stepping outside of the mold that of right and wrong and
Mhm.
more so hearing perceptions and looking at everything as a perception and being open to it.
Mhm.
And then you get to adopt what is yours and what resonates and what doesn't. But that incarnation class for me was like, whoo. And then she started doing proof and stuff of it and like to stories. And I was like, I need like a week to process
Mhm.
and adjust. But it's funny because everyone has that moment, I feel like, in their story, not necessarily a reincarnation class, but everyone has that moment where they're like, oh, the floodgates just opened.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think for a long time for me too with astrology, I did want like the scientific, like I wanted to be able to explain it to people that like made sense. And I studied and I read like every book because I was like, I need to explain everything to somebody so there's no questions and da. And I was just having a conversation with someone last night and I was reading their chart, right? And I was like, your moon is in Aquarius, whatever. And I was just like kind of going through that. And they're like, I don't know if I really resonate with that. And in my head, I'm like, well, it's because it's in the 12th house square Pluto. So of course you wouldn't resonate with, but how do you explain that to somebody, without like, especially somebody who has
Yeah.
no idea about like astrology at all. And so I've had to step back and just be like, how can I explain it and talk about it in a way I don't have to I don't have to teach it, right? Because I think
Hmm.
that's where like my shadow came in with that imposter syndrome, of like I have to know everything and I have to be able to explain everything and I have to teach you everything. And it's like people don't necessarily want to be taught; they just want to hear. So I'm like kind of like shifting the way that I perceive things, and yeah, just knowing that. Even like you're talking like with writing a book, like not needing to have all of like the facts and to be able to trust myself and to know that like whatever I put out there isn't going to land with everybody and that's fine. It doesn't have to,
Hmm.
right? Like as long as I'm speaking my truth and staying within that. So was imposter syndrome something you dealt with? How do you deal with it, or how did you deal with it and like
Oh
overcome
gosh,
that and just
yeah.
kind of like stay true to yourself in spite of it?
Well, for me it was really hard because I was already an influencer when
Mm,
my life went to hell in a handbasket. So I publicly like fell on my face and crashed and burned in front of 50,000 people.
mm,
And it was insanity. When I was trying to be something that I wasn't, I was getting all this hate mail and I had to take a break.
mm,
I almost deleted my Instagram altogether. And I'm very thankful that I did it. But I was like, you know what? I got to this space of I took probably a 3-month break off of social media in general just to kind of clear my mind and really focus on my own work. And when I came back, I was like, you know what? At the time, my dad was starting to like, my parents were like, oh, I'm going to expose you for who you are. No one knew I was an alcoholic. No one knew I was struggling. No one knew anything. And I was like, you know what? Fuck everyone. I'm going to tell my story.
mm,
And so I openly talked about my affair, and I was like, my husband may leave me for publicly putting this in front of all these people, like, and so I had to navigate that with him and make sure that I wasn't causing harm to him. And when I decided to show up as authentically me and truly, if someone wasn't there for me, because at that time I had lost all my friends. So I had no friends. I was like the talk of the town, right? And so I had no one. I had nothing to lose. And I think when you get to that spot at the time, it feels horrible. But it's also this like pivotal freeing moment of like, fuck this, I can create whoever I want to be. And it's a safe space. So I think for me, when I first told my story, and it was an edited version, obviously, but when now I talk about it super flowing because I'm
mhm,
just, I don't care. But when I first told my story, the amount of messages that I got from women that were either A, having affairs and no one knew about it, B, closet alcoholics, C, having no idea how to even work through trauma or had been through trauma and were falling apart but still surviving. I was so overwhelmed. I will never forget. I just sat there crying because I was terrified to hit the post button. I hit it, and then all of a sudden it was like ping, 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 ping. And I was like, what is going on? And I realized I was like, oh my gosh, like you're not special. You're not this like shining bright of, going through this alone. Like there are so many people that are going through this exact same thing right where you were. Like you could use this to help people. And then that moment was when I was like, okay, I'm going back to school. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But it was like with imposter syndrome, for a long time when I first started, it was like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to help someone when I was still on my own journey. And my mentor had told me, they said, you are never fully healed. I was like, I can't do this till I'm healed. I can't do this till I have this certificate. I can do this till I have this license. I can't. And it was always, I can't. And they pointed that out to me and they were like, you are never healed until you die. That's when you learn your lessons. And they're like, the only way that you know that you are truly healed is when you wake up and you feel free. And it doesn't mean that lessons aren't going to keep popping in and there's still going to be pain. There's obviously always going to be suffering and there's always going to be pain. But it's that moment that like, you know how to navigate that pain in a responsive way versus a reactive way. And for me, that was a pivotal moment in my imposter syndrome, was that like, I know that if I come from a space of integrity and I come from a space of truly knowing that I could help someone, the imposter syndrome seems to go away. And I have to like tell myself, even before certain videos or certain things that I do, talking about my story is now very comfortable, but it's very comfortable because I had to get uncomfortable for years of sharing it and cringing and wondering what the protocol was going to be after it went live and all the things, and literally crawling out of my skin. But I feel like you do that enough times and it just goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you come to this space of authenticity and being able to be a person because you've leaned into that discomfort. And as cheesy as that sounds, I used to hate it when people would say that to me, but as cheesy as that sounds, it's so true. Like, we have to get used to being uncomfortable because that's where the growth happens. And then with imposter syndrome, like, I don't think there's a woman on the planet who hasn't dealt with imposter syndrome, because it's so easy to fall into this competitive game with the world that we live in, because everyone is putting their best foot forward and you only see a very small portion of it. You're not seeing the whole 9 yards of what's going on behind the camera. You're not seeing the work that they've done. You're not seeing the tears that they've cried. You're not, and so now, having talked to a bunch of very successful women and people that are on the same paths, it's been like, oh my gosh, we're all going through the same thing. Like, maybe it doesn't look the same, maybe it's a different font, but it's all the same.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. I think that exactly that, leaning into the discomfort. And even like with the podcast, for me, still, like when I book an interview with somebody, there is a part of me that gets anxious, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, like what if I don't know how to like steer the conversation, and I have like this little bit of anxiety. So I always like meditate beforehand, but it is like, it would be easy for me to like avoid it, be like, oh, it's not the right fit because it feels uncomfortable, right? But it's like showing up every single time. Like when I get off of an interview with somebody or a conversation, like I feel so lit up. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like that, so it lights me up, and it's, but at the same time, like astrology, I have my Chiron in the 11th house, right? So that's kind of an aspect to me that's always going to be a little bit of a wounding, right? It's the not fitting in, or the not feeling like I know enough, and stuff like that. But it's funny too, like so just like total side note, but my mom, I never told I even had a podcast, because part of my story is from my childhood and I don't want to hurt her in that process, right? I think we all have, we're all valid for our experiences, but they're not always viewed the same, right? My mom doesn't view the experience of my child the same way that I did, because she's not me, right? And so I never told her about the podcast. And my son told her literally like 2 months ago. And so I had this moment where I kind of freaked out a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to go listen to all this stuff. And then I was like, should I just stop? Like literally my mind went to that place where I was like, should I just stop the podcast now? And I had to sit myself down. I was like, Rochelle, don't let this change anything. You might have to have a couple hard conversations, but like, I just, so it's like, just like pushing past that. And I don't know, that was just like a side note, but it's just like, it is that pushing through the discomfort and in knowing your true self and kind of being free within that,
Yeah.
So like, to all the women that when you told your story, the women that were emailing you and DMing you, that they resonated with it, and anybody listening to this right now that is maybe in the same situation, like what is your one piece of advice to them?
I think for me, everyone told me, so I wouldn't even go just to put this in perspective, I cared so much what people thought about me, except people that meet me now or talk to me now, they're like, no, you didn't. Just to put it into like full perspective, I wouldn't even go to the grocery store in my town because I was terrified that maybe someone saw me buying wine there drunk the week before when I was planning on killing myself. So I didn't go to the grocery store in my town for over 6 months, like would not step foot in it. I drove 45 minutes one way, 45 minutes the other way, out of my way to go to a store to make sure I wouldn't see anyone I knew. So that's how much I was hiding. And for me, the moment that I admitted that I needed help and was willing to do the work, that's when my life changed. But I had never been, I think you really have to be in a space that you are able to question your own beliefs and you're able to do the work. And I always compare it to this book. You have kids. Have you ever read that We're Going on a Bear Hunt book?
Mm-mm.
So there's this one part of the book and it's like, we're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. We're not scared. And it's like, we can't go over it. We can't go under it. We got to go through it. And there's this one mud part in the book and it's like squelchy scorch, squelchy scorch. And that is what I compare the start of your journey to, because it's so not sexy. You're walking through mud, you're a hot mess. You have no idea what you're doing. Everything feels heavy. You just want to crawl out of your skin, but you're putting one foot in front of the other. And so I think that first thing is just being honest with yourself that like something needs to fucking change in your life in order for you to feel true joy. Until we come to that space that we are willing to do that, I don't think anything will change, because we just keep on the hamster wheel and keep on the cycle of what is comfortable and what is working for us.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for sharing your story. It is so empowering, and what you do and how you help people, and just having these conversations and being vulnerable is it's so, I think, empowering for women to just know that, they can, move through it, and that there is, another side to it and everything. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners, how they can find you, how they can work with you, all the stuff?
Yeah. So everything is under the Sweetest Little Life. So Instagram, my website, all the things. And we just opened up a holistic healing center, which is very exciting. I just felt a need this year after COVID to have more like in-person connection. We've been virtual for so long. So yeah, I'm always open to chat and talk if someone feels that it resonated.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your energy and everything today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.